The evening fog in Denver was thick, but not as thick as the deceit fogging up my car. I was just supposed to pick him up after a late day. But then I saw him. And her. They didn't know I was there, in the gloom of the parking garage, watching the play that would shatter my life. And in the dead silence of the car, I heard everything. My name is Alara Vance. I am 38 years old, and I design systems. I am a data architect, a person who builds order from chaos. My life is about structure, logic, and seeing the invisible frameworks that hold things together. Tonight, I saw the framework of my own life, and it was rotten to the core. I was sitting in my dark Audi, parked on the subterranean P2 level of the Aperture Dynamics building. The air was cold, smelling of curing concrete and old exhaust. A fluorescent light flickered intermittently 3 rows down, casting long, sick shadows. This was Julian's company, the fintech startup he ran, the one I had poured my life into. I was here to surprise him. It was our anniversary, and I had reservations at a place he'd wanted to try for months. A celebration. The private elevator, the one reserved for C-suite executives, chimed softly. The brushed steel doors slid open. My heart did a familiar little jump. But it wasn't just Julian. It was Julian and Sabine. Sabine, his COO, his college girlfriend, the woman he swore was just part of the team, a necessary asset. They stepped out onto the concrete, and my hand, which had been halfway to the ignition to flash the headlights, froze. They didn't walk toward the ramp leading to Julian's reserved spot. They stopped, tucking themselves into a shadowed alcove formed by a massive support pillar. They were close. Too close. Close enough that they were standing right beside the hood of my car, oblivious to my presence. I thumb-clicked the interior display off, plunging the cabin into absolute, suffocating darkness. I held my breath. They were arguing. But it wasn't the kind of argument colleagues have. It was low, intimate, charged with a history I had been told was long dead. Sabine's voice was a strained whisper. Julian's was meant to soothe. Then he moved. He pulled her against him, his hands sliding into her hair, his tall frame curving around her. It was an embrace of possession, not comfort. "Just need to get through Friday," he murmured, his voice vibrating through the quiet garage. I heard it clearly. "Sabine, just Friday. After the Series B funding closes. She's out. She's out." The words didn't compute. They hung in the cold air, meaningless syllables. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled for the phone in my coat pocket. My hand was shaking so violently I almost dropped it. I swiped, found the voice memo app, and pressed the red circle. Sabine pulled back just enough to look at him. "And the contingency, are you sure?" Julian laughed. It was a sound I had never heard before. It was cold, sharp, and utterly devoid of the warmth I knew. "Don't worry," he said. "The entire Project Alpine architecture is based on her design. She'll never realize she engineered her own prison." The breath left my body in a painful rush. Project Alpine. My code name. The proprietary security structure I had designed. The algorithm that made Aperture Dynamics unique. The very thing that was attracting this new round of funding. I had built it from scratch, working unpaid for 2 solid years, nights and weekends, fueled by his promises of our future, of building an empire together. He had called me his secret weapon. He just hadn't told me I was the target, before I could even process the theft. Sabine rose on her toes and kissed him. It was not a peck. It was a long, deep kiss of ownership, a seal on a bargain. My stomach twisted into a knot of acid. "And the Zurich house," she whispered against his mouth. "Waiting for us," Julian replied. He kissed her once more, a quick, hard gesture, then took her hand. They walked away, their footsteps echoing in sync, heading toward his Tesla in the adjacent row. The car doors shut, a solid final sound. The headlights cut through the gloom, swept across my windshield. And then they were gone, leaving only the scent of gasoline and betrayal. I sat motionless. I don't know for how long. The only thing moving was the digital clock on the dashboard, silently marking the death of my life. 10 minutes. 20. The silence in the car was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. Then, a vibration. My phone, forgotten in my lap, buzzed against my leg. I looked down. The screen lit up the darkness. It was the restaurant, a polite notification. Your 8:30 reservation will be canceled in 10 minutes. I looked at the other open app, the red bar of the voice recorder still pulsing, capturing nothing but the sound of my own shattered breathing. I had the proof. I had the evidence, but the price of listening to it was the complete and total demolition of everything I thought was real. I drove home. I don't remember the specifics of the drive, only the feeling of the steering wheel beneath my numb hands and the way the city lights of Cherry Creek blurred into wet streaks against the windshield. The world outside the glass felt distant, a movie playing on mute. I was floating, disconnected, a ghost in my own machine. Our penthouse was dark, the way I liked it, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the mountains. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the chaos inside my head. I walked across the cold marble floor, my heels not making a sound, and set my keys in the glass bowl by the door. A perfectly normal routine. Then my phone vibrated on the console. A text from Julian. "Sorry, baby. Investor meeting ran long. We'll be home late. Don't wait up." The lie was so easy, so clean. It slid into my life with the practiced ease of a key in a familiar lock. And that's when the numbness began to recede, replaced by something sharp and cold. It wasn't just my heart he had torn out. It was my mind. He hadn't just cheated on a wife. He had defrauded a colleague. He had betrayed an architect. And architects, I thought, know how to read a blueprint. I walked past our bedroom and went straight to his home office. The room was his sanctuary, all dark wood and brushed steel, but I was the one who had built its digital defenses. I had configured his entire network, his servers, his firewalls. I had designed the system to be impenetrable to the outside world. I had never considered I would be the one breaking in. I sat in his expensive leather chair and woke the terminal. The server login screen appeared. Enter password. I typed it in without a second of hesitation. Ilara My Savior 21. Ilara My Savior 21. The year he had convinced me to leave my job at a major firm to join his vision. The year I had started working for free. The irony was so bitter it physically choked me. Nausea rose in my throat, hot and acidic. I swallowed it down. The pain was focusing me. Access granted. I navigated the directory. It was all familiar. Files and folders I had helped him organize. Then, the one I was looking for, Project Alpine. I opened it. It was clean, filled with my work, my algorithms, my data structures, exactly as I had left it. But something was wrong. A data architect senses imbalance, the same way a sailor senses a shift in the wind. The file size of the parent directory was too large for the visible contents. There was a hidden folder, a simple command line entry, and it appeared, grayed out and encrypted, Alpine Exit Strategy. I had built his encryption. I had the master keys, the folder unlocked. It was not a strategy, it was a conspiracy. The first file was a PDF. Sabine's new employment contract, set to execute this coming Monday. I scanned the terms. Her salary was doubled. But it was the addendum that stopped my breath. A stock bonus. A massive, staggering tranche of founder-level shares, vesting immediately upon a single trigger, the termination, resignation, or removal of Ilara Vance from any and all operational duties. He wasn't just leaving me. He was firing me from the company I had built. My hands were steady now. The tremor was gone. I opened the next subfolder. Legal Final. Inside was a pending legal filing, a single document prepared by a law firm I didn't recognize. It was a full, irrevocable transfer of intellectual property rights. My intellectual property. The core algorithms that made Project Alpine work. It transferred them all. My life's work. From me to a shell corporation registered in Delaware. And at the bottom, my signature. I stared at it. I hadn't signed this. Then I remembered. 3 years ago. The house. We were buying our first home, and he had come to me with a stack of papers, laughing about how much paperwork there was. Just sign here, and here, he'd said, pointing. It's just the power of attorney for the bank, so I can handle the closing while you're at your conference. I had signed, trusting him, my mind on mortgages and interest rates. A complex, broad strokes power of attorney. He had used it to steal my mind. I checked the Delaware Corporation's registration. The sole managing partner, Sabine Parker. They hadn't just stolen my work. They had used my own hand to give it to them. There was one last folder. ZDN Concepts. I opened it. Zurich Data Nexus. It was all there. A complete business plan, branding guidelines, detailed financial projections. A new Swiss company, built entirely on the foundation of my technology. The same technology Julian was simultaneously selling to his new Series B investors as the property of Aperture Dynamics. He wasn't just leaving me. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was committing massive, multi-million-dollar fraud. The pain was gone now. It had burned away, leaving behind something clean and hard as steel. This wasn't grief. This was logic. This was a system analysis. I was an architect looking at a structurally unsound building, a building that had to come down. I reached into my bag and pulled out an encrypted solid-state drive. I plugged it into his server. The copy process began, a silent blue bar tracking across the screen, transferring every file, every contract, every blueprint. The building was compromised, and I was the only one who knew where to place the charges. With the encrypted drive secure in my bag, I left his office, shutting the door softly. The marble was cold under my feet as I walked back to the living room. I needed a lawyer. Not our lawyer, the one on Aperture's payroll who had handled our estate planning. He wasn't my lawyer. He was Julian's. I needed someone who understood the technology as well as the law. I needed someone who wouldn't be intimidated by Julian's charm or his web of connections. I needed a shark. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in almost a year. It was 2 a.m. in New York City, but I knew he'd be awake. He picked up on the third ring, his voice sharp and clear, not a trace of sleep in it. Thorne. Marcus. It's Alara. Alara Vance. A pause. Lara, it's been a long time. This doesn't sound like a social call. I need you. Marcus, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. I have a situation. Intellectual property theft. Fraud. Massive, complex fraud. Marcus Thorne had been my roommate at Stanford. While I was building systems, he was learning how to take them apart in court. He was now one of the most feared IP litigators in the country. My office, he said. 6 a.m. Can you make it? I'm booking the flight now, I said. See you then. He hung up. I booked a 4 a.m. red-eye out of Denver. Then I went to the bedroom. Julian was still out. I packed an overnight bag, my movements quick and efficient. Just as I was zipping it, his text came in. Home in 20. You still up? I waited 5 minutes. Just woke up. My sister's just been in an accident in New York. It sounds bad. I'm at the airport. I have to go. His reply was immediate. Oh God, Alara, I'm so sorry. Of course. Go. Keep me updated. Do you need me to come? No, I typed, my fingers cold. You have the Series B meeting. Stay. Close the deal. I'll handle my family. My brave girl, he sent. Call me when you land. I turned the phone off and left the apartment. At 6:05 a.m., I was walking into the glass-walled conference room of Marcus Thorne's Manhattan office. The skyline behind him was just beginning to turn from indigo to a bruised purple. He hadn't changed. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, a cup of black coffee steaming on the table. Family emergency, he asked, gesturing for me to sit. "The only family I have left is a sister who's perfectly healthy in Seattle," I said, sitting down. I didn't waste time. I placed the encrypted drive on the polished table between us. "This is everything." For the next 45 minutes, I spoke. I was precise, methodical. I was a data architect presenting a system failure. I laid out the structure of Project Alpine, my algorithms, my 2 years of unpaid work. I detailed the server's hidden folders, the contracts, the Delaware shell company, the Zurich business plan. Then, I played the audio file from the parking garage. Marcus listened to the entire recording, his face completely impassive. He steepled his fingers, staring at the hard drive. He didn't offer sympathy. He didn't say he was sorry. It was why I had come to him. When the recording ended, a full minute of silence passed. He just stared at the drive. Finally, he looked up, his eyes locking onto mine. "Ilara," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of steel. "This is not a divorce. This is a RICO case. This is large-scale securities fraud, wire fraud, and grand theft of intellectual property." He stood up and walked to the window. "He's not just defrauding you. He's defrauding his new investors. He's pitching them a $50 million valuation based on technology he doesn't own. He's misrepresented the core assets of the entire company." I nodded. "I know. You don't know the half of it." He went to his desk, sat down, and his fingers flew across his keyboard. He was a different kind of architect, and he was searching his own databases. The Delaware shell. Alpine exit strategy. Registered to Sabine Parker. "Yes," I said. "She's not just sitting on it. Ilara." He spun his monitor around. My blood went cold. He had pulled up a database of international tech licensing agreements. "This LLC has been active for the last 2 months. She's been selling sub-licenses, small, quiet deals to 3 different overseas competitors." I stared at the screen. They weren't just planning to cut me out and start a new company in Zurich. They were actively gutting Aperture Dynamics from the inside, selling off its core technology, my technology, to competitors before the Series B funding had even closed. They were poisoning the well, preparing to take the new money and run, leaving the investors with a hollowed-out shell. "They're burning it all," I whispered. "They're burning you," Marcus corrected me. "And they're burning their investors." He spun the monitor back. The sun was up now, glinting off the buildings. "So what do we do?" I asked. "Do we file an injunction? Go to the SEC?" Marcus shook his head. "No. An injunction is public. The investors will panic and pull out. The company implodes. The value of your IP evaporates, and Julian declares bankruptcy. You'll be tied up in court for 5 years fighting for scraps." "No. He wants a show." He looked at the calendar on his desk. "The board meeting is Friday. He's planning to announce the $50 million funding. He needs that money to land before he and Sabine can disappear to Zurich." "He wants me there," I said, remembering his texts. "He said for support. He wants you there as a prop," Marcus said. "To smile and wave at the new money, to project stability. And I'll bet he has one last document he needs you to sign." A plan began to form in my mind. A new architecture, cold and precise. "So I go," I said. Marcus smiled, a thin, dangerous expression. "You go. You play the supportive wife. You don't sign anything. You don't breathe a word of this. You let him walk right up to the finish line. And then, Marcus said, picking up the hard drive. "We introduce a system crash." I returned to Denver on the last flight out of LaGuardia, landing just before midnight. I was exhausted, but it was a useful kind of exhaustion, a heavy cloak I could pull around myself. I let the fatigue show in my walk, in the way I slumped into the passenger seat of the Uber. I was no longer an architect. I was an actress, and this was the most important role of my life. I let myself into the penthouse. The lights were on. Julian was on the sofa, a laptop open, a glass of whiskey on the side table. He looked up, his face a mask of concern. "Ilara, my God," he said, rushing over, pulling me into a hug. His embrace felt like a cage. "How is she? How's your sister?" I let my head fall against his chest. "She's stable," I murmured. "A few broken ribs, a concussion. She was scared. I'm so glad I went." I held him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, a lying, treacherous muscle. "You look exhausted, baby," he said, stroking my hair, the same hand that had held Sabine in the garage. "I'm so sorry. I should have been there." "No," I said, pulling back just enough to look at him. I manufactured a tired smile. "You're right. The Series B is everything. We're almost there. How is it? Did the crisis pass?" He sighed, a performance of a man carrying the world on his shoulders. "It's a beast, but it's almost done. This meeting on Friday is the final hurdle, the big one." He led me to the sofa. He had brought flowers, a huge bouquet of white lilies, my favorites. They filled the room with a funereal scent. "I've been neglecting you," he said, his voice soft and full of false sincerity. "This funding crisis has been all-consuming, but after Friday, I promise, it's just you and me." "And Zurich?" I asked, my voice light. "And Zurich." He smiled. "A long vacation." He explained that the main investors were flying in for the final signatory meeting. "It's critical, Ilara," he said, taking my hands. "I need you there, for moral support, to show them what we've built, to show them the team we are." The lie was so perfect, so smooth. He didn't need me for support. He needed me as a prop, to put a face to the name he had already signed away. He needed me to legitimize the theft in front of the very people he was defrauding. I played my part. I was the tired, worried, but supportive wife. We went to bed, and I let him hold me, my entire body rigid, my mind 1,000 miles away, running calculations. I feigned sleep while he breathed deeply beside me, a man without a conscience. The next day was Thursday, the day before the meeting. I worked from home, claiming I needed to be near the phone for hospital updates. Julian was in and out, a whirlwind of important calls and feigned stress. That evening, he came into my home office. I was staring at a screen of data, my data, the very architecture he was stealing. He had a stack of papers in his hand, bound in a neat, professional cover. He also had a glass of ice water for me. How thoughtful. "Hey," he said softly. "I know you're tired, but could you look at this?" He placed the documents on my desk, right next to the water. "It's just the updated share structure for the new investors," he said, breezy and casual. "A formality, spousal consent for the new dilution. You just need to sign at the bottom." I picked it up. My hands were perfectly steady. I read the title. "Final Waiver and Assignment of Intellectual Property Rights and Interests." I scanned the text. It was dense legalese, but the language was brutally clear. I, Ilara Vance, in consideration of the new investment, did hereby and forever relinquish, waive, and assign any and all rights, present and future, to any technology, algorithm, or system related to Project Alpine and all its derivatives. It was the kill shot, the legal document that would make his theft clean and absolute. It would retroactively erase my 2 years of work, my ownership, my very contribution. It was the document Marcus had warned me about. I looked up at him. He was smiling, that warm, reassuring smile that had once been my whole world. "Looks complicated," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "It's just lawyer speak, baby," he said, tapping the last page. "The signature line is right here. Then it's done. We can celebrate." I picked up the heavy brass pen from my desk holder. I uncapped it. "Okay," I said, and smiled at him. And as I moved the pen toward the paper, my other hand, clumsy from exhaustion, spasmed. It hit the base of the glass of ice water. Time slowed down. The glass tipped, a perfect, graceful arc. The water and ice cubes crashed across the desk. a tidal wave of freezing liquid that completely saturated the bound documents. The ink on the top page began to run almost immediately. I gasped. "Oh my God, Julian. Oh no." I grabbed for the papers, pulling them away, but they were soaked, ruined, a pulpy, dripping mess. "Julian, I am so sorry," I said, my voice trembling with manufactured horror. "I'm just so tired. I'm so clumsy." I looked up at him, his face, for one fleeting, terrible second. The mask slipped. It wasn't frustration. It was pure, unadulterated rage. His eyes were black. His jaw was so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. He was furious. Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. He forced a laugh, a strangled, ugly sound. It's fine. It's fine. Alara, don't worry. It's just paper." He was breathing hard. "I'll print another copy." "No, let me," I said, standing up, wringing my hands. "It's my fault. Don't you worry about it. You have enough to deal with before the meeting. I'll come to the office early, first thing tomorrow. I'll sign it there before anyone even arrives. I promise." He stared at me, his mind clearly racing. He needed that signature before the investors arrived. My offer was the only logical solution. "Okay," he said, finally, his voice tight. "Okay. 8 a.m. My office. We'll sign it before the 11 a.m. meeting." "I'll be there," I said. "I won't let you down." He managed another smile, kissed my forehead, and took the soggy pile of paper from me. "Get some rest, baby. Tomorrow is a big day." As he walked out of the room, I sat back down in my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had bought us time. I had followed Marcus's one, critical instruction: do not sign anything. The final act was set for the morning, while Julian slept the sleep of the truly sociopathic. I was in my home office with the door locked, on a silent video call with Marcus. My feigned exhaustion was gone, replaced by the cold, bright energy of adrenaline. "The lead investor," Marcus said, his face illuminated by his monitor in New York. "He's been stupid. Alara. He's been bragging to the fintech press about landing the whale. I've got my people running it down." "He's arrogant," I said. "He thinks he's already won." "Arrogance gets sloppy." Marcus's screen flickered as he read from his own sources. "Got it. The lead is Westhorn Capital, a private equity firm out of Chicago. They're the ones putting in the $50 million. The deal is contingent on their final due diligence, which is what Friday's meeting is all about." "Westhorn Capital," I repeated. The name was unfamiliar. "They're a new player, but they're vicious," Marcus said. "Run by one person, an absolute legend, moves like a shark. Eleanor Vance." I froze. "Vance, any relation?" "Checked it," Marcus said. "None. Just a coincidence. But from what I know of her, she's the last person on earth you want to try and defraud. She's ruthless, old school, and smarter than anyone in the room. She doesn't just invest, she acquires. If she finds out Julian is playing her, then we have to tell her," I said. "We send her the drive." "No," Marcus said instantly. "Absolutely not. Think. Alara, we go to her now. As the wife. With this story, we sound scorned, emotional. It's a he said, she said in the middle of a $50 million deal. Julian will paint you as unstable, hysterical, trying to sabotage him over a personal matter. He'll deny everything, and her lawyers will advise her to stay clear of the drama. She might even back out of the deal entirely, and the company and your IP becomes worthless." He was right. Julian would charm his way through it, framing me as the crazy wife. We couldn't attack him from the front. I looked at the code on my screen, the elegant, complex structure of Project Alpine. My structure. "He's been lying to them," I said, thinking aloud. "He's been lying about the scalability." "How do you know?" "Because I built it," I said, a cold fury rising. "I designed it for secure data processing, not high-frequency trading. which is what he's been pitching. He's been demoing a sandboxed, idealized version. He's promised them it can handle 50,000 concurrent transactions. I know for a fact the core algorithm will bottleneck and crash at 10,000. He's been padding the performance reports by almost 80%. He's selling them a race car that's secretly a station wagon. Marcus summarized. Exactly. And if I'm an investor doing my final due diligence, I'm not just listening to the CEO, I'm scanning the technical forums. I'm looking for independent analysis. A new plan clicked into place. A beautiful, logical piece of architecture. I can't approach Eleanor Vance as the wife, I said. But a concerned, anonymous expert can. I spent the next hour creating a new persona, a burner account on FinTech Core, a high-level invitation-only forum for data scientists and quants. I routed my connection through 3 different countries. My handle was EV Architect. Then I wrote. I didn't write with anger. I wrote with the cold precision of a technical review. I composed a 2,000-word analysis titled Critical Scalability Flaw in Emerging FinTech Data Structures. I never mentioned aperture dynamics. I didn't have to. I laid out the public-facing architecture, the one Julian had been bragging about in trade papers, and then I systematically dismantled it. I exposed the central processing bottleneck. I posted simulation results showing a catastrophic failure rate above 10,500 transactions. I questioned how any platform built on this framework could possibly support enterprise-level deployment. I signed off as a concerned peer. I hit post. It was 3 a.m. in Denver. Now we wait, I said to Marcus. I didn't have to wait long. By 6 a.m., my post had exploded. It had over 300 comments, mostly from other engineers, some agreeing, some trying to poke holes in my analysis. I spent an hour defending my thesis, my fingers flying, running circles around them technically. I proved my point. The consensus in the comments became clear whatever company this was. It was a ticking time bomb. At 7:15 a.m., I received a private message on the forum. It wasn't a comment. It was from the forum administrator, a man named Ben Carter, an old colleague of mine from Stanford. E.V. The message read, "This is a hell of an analysis. I have a team from a major PE firm breathing down my neck. They want to know who you are. They say it's vital to their due diligence. They're willing to pay a 5-figure consultation fee. I'm forwarding their encrypted contact email. What do you want me to do?" My heart hammered. It was them, Eleanor Vance's team. They hadn't just seen the post, they had recognized their own target. I replied to Ben, "Tell them I value my anonymity, but I am willing to provide a 30-minute advisory call. No fee. My only condition is that I speak directly to their technical lead. Send them this burner email address. Tell them to send a meeting link." Marcus, watching on his screen, let out a low whistle. "You've got them on the hook." "They're walking into the meeting at 11 a.m., I said. "They're nervous. They need an expert to either confirm or deny their worst fears before they sign a $50 million check." 5 minutes later, an encrypted email invitation appeared in my new inbox from the head of technical due diligence at West Thorn Capital. The subject, urgent consultation. The meeting time Friday, 8 a.m., 3 hours before the board meeting. I accepted the invitation. I would check into a cash-paid hotel room in an hour. I would join the call as EV, the anonymous expert, and I would technically, calmly, and absolutely destroy Julian's deal from the outside. Then, I would go to the office, meet my husband, and prepare to destroy him from the inside. The pincer movement was in place. At 7:58 a.m., I was in an anonymous hotel room on the west side of Denver. I had paid in cash. The room was beige and smelled of stale cigarettes. My burner laptop sat open on the desk. My real phone was off, stuffed in the bottom of my bag. I had sent Julian a text 40 minutes earlier. "Nightmare, flat tire on the way from the hospital. I'm in a rideshare now, but I'll be late for our 8 a.m. I am so sorry. I'll race there. Should make it by 9. His reply had been instant. "Just get here. Ilara. We have to sign before the investors arrive." Do not be late for the 11 a.m. meeting. Not, are you safe? Not, what a terrible morning. Just the signature. At exactly 8 a.m., the encrypted conference link on my laptop became active. I clicked join. I left my camera disabled. My voice was routed through a light modulator, just enough to add a metallic rasp and lower the pitch. "We are connected," a man's voice said, crisp and professional. "This is David Hale, head of technical diligence for Westhorn Capital. Am I speaking with EV?" "You are," I said. The modulated voice sounded alien in the quiet room. "You have 30 minutes. Let's not waste them." "Very well," Hale said. He sounded skeptical, tired. The sound of a man doing a final boring checkbox. "Your forum post was detailed. You make some significant claims about a particular data architecture. We are in the final stage of a major investment based on that very architecture. We need you to substantiate these claims. Frankly, your analysis seems entirely theoretical." "It is not theoretical," I said, my voice cold and flat. "Let's begin with your primary concern, scalability. The company you're looking at. Aperture Dynamics." "We did not name the company," Hale interrupted sharply. "You didn't have to. Julian Vance has been loud in the trade press. He is promising your investors a platform that can handle 50,000 concurrent transactions. That is a lie." "We have seen the stress tests," Hale countered. "The performance was acceptable. You saw a simulation. You saw a sandboxed demonstration running looped data. I am telling you, as an architect, their live system cannot, under any circumstances, process more than 10,000 concurrent transactions. The moment it hits a load of, say, 12,000, the central processing queue will bottleneck, cascade, and corrupt the entire data chain within 3 minutes. Ask them to run a live, unscheduled stress test. Right now, they will refuse." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. The skepticism was fading. "Furthermore," I continued, "their proprietary risk analysis algorithm, the one they value at $20 million alone, it's a poorly implemented, inefficient copy of a standard Black-Scholes model from the 1990s. It's academic. It's flawed. It completely fails to account for modern high-frequency volatility markers. The second you put that system under actual, real-world regulatory pressure from the SEC, it will not just fail, it will produce fraudulent and non-compliant reports." There was a long, heavy silence. I could hear the faint click of a keyboard in the background as he scrambled to check his own team's findings. "EV," he said finally, his voice much quieter. "These are devastating allegations. They are specific. How can you possibly know this? Do you work for them?" I let the silence stretch, a tactic I had learned from Marcus. Let them fill the void. "How do you know?" he pressed. "I know," I said, "because the original architect designed that system for a completely different purpose. It was built to be a secure vault for long-term data integrity. It was designed for stability, not speed. The current CEO has taken that foundation, bent it to fit a marketing narrative he doesn't technically understand, and is trying to sell it as a high-speed transactional engine. He has ripped out the load-bearing walls because they were in the way of his new floor plan. He has no comprehension of the consequences. But you will. About 30 days after you wire him $50 million. The silence that followed was absolute. I had given them the bullets and the gun. Hale, the technical expert, knew I was telling the truth. The specifics were too accurate. I was about to disconnect, my mission complete, when a new voice joined the call. It was a woman. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the audio feed with the clarity of a surgeon's scalpel. It was steeped in authority and old money. "EV, this is Eleanor Vance." My heart, which had been beating a steady, cold rhythm, stopped dead. She had been on the line. She had been listening to the entire takedown. "Your analysis is compelling," she stated. It was not a compliment. It was an assessment. "I am in Denver. I am at the Four Seasons. I want to meet you." That is not possible, I said, my modulated voice a sudden thin defense. I must remain anonymous. I am not interested in your anonymity, Eleanor Vance replied, her tone sharpening. You have either just saved me from a $50 million mistake, or you are trying to manipulate my position in a multi-million-dollar deal. I intend to find out which. I want to see you. Now. I looked at the clock on the wall. 8:27 a.m. Julian was expecting me at 9. The board meeting was at 11. I cannot meet now, I said. I have a prior engagement. It is critical. There was a pause. I could almost feel her calculating, assessing my own confidence. 10 a.m., she said. It was not a request. My private suite at the Four Seasons. 10 a.m. That gives you 90 minutes for your engagement. You will be there. This was the variable I hadn't planned for. This was the system adapting. I had to adapt with it. Julian at 9, Eleanor at 10, the board at 11. The timeline was collapsing into a single critical hour. 10 a.m., I agreed. I will be there. I look forward to it, she said. The line clicked dead. I had to lie to Julian twice more to get away. I used a fake rideshare cancellation and a frantic call about a lost wallet to explain why I couldn't make the 9 a.m. signing. I told him I was a mess and would just meet him in the boardroom at 10:45, right before the 11 a.m. meeting. I'll sign it right there. Julian, I promise. He was furious, his voice tight with an anger he was trying to suppress. But he agreed. He had no choice. At exactly 10 a.m., I walked into the penthouse suite at the Four Seasons. The air was still, the only sound the faint hum of the city far below. This was a place of quiet, absolute power. Eleanor Vance was in an armchair, not behind a desk. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored navy dress. She looked to be in her late 60s, and her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes were a pale, penetrating blue, and they missed nothing. David Hale, the technical lead from the call, stood by the window, looking pale and holding a tablet. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open, as I walked in without a voice modulator, my face fully visible. You, he whispered. Mrs. Vance, I presume, Eleanor said. Her voice was exactly as it had been on the phone, a crisp, commanding alto. You're not what I expected. I am not E.V., I said, my voice steady. I walked to the center of the room. My name is Alara Vance. I am the original architect of Project Alpine, and I am Julian Vance's wife. David Hale looked like he was going to be sick. Eleanor did not blink. She simply gestured to the chair opposite her. You have 15 minutes to explain why my legal team shouldn't have you arrested for market manipulation. I didn't sit. I stood. This was not a confession. It was a presentation. On the call, I gave you the technical vulnerabilities. I said, now I'm giving you the criminal conspiracy. I took the encrypted drive from my bag and my phone. I placed my phone on the coffee table between us and pressed play. The audio from the parking garage filled the silent, expensive room. Julian's voice, low and intimate. After the Series B funding closes, she's out. She'll never realize she engineered her own prison, and the Zurich house waiting for us. I watched Eleanor's face. Nothing. No shock. No anger. Just cold, intense focus. When it finished, I didn't wait for a reaction. I plugged the hard drive into my laptop and turned the screen toward her. This is Alpine Exit Strategy, a hidden folder from his private server. This is the new employment contract for his COO, Sabine Parker, granting her a controlling share of stock triggered by my removal. This is the fraudulent power of attorney I signed 3 years ago, believing it was for our mortgage, which he used to transfer my intellectual property. This is the Delaware Shell Corporation, managed by Ms. Parker. And this, I clicked, is the proof. They have already begun sublicensing my technology, the core asset of your $50 million investment, to 3 overseas competitors. I saved the final file for last. And this is Zurich Data Nexus, the business plan for a new company in Switzerland, using my algorithms as its foundation, which he intends to fund with your money, leaving Aperture Dynamics a hollow shell. I finished. I was breathing fast. The entire architecture of his betrayal was laid bare. Eleanor Vance was silent for a full minute. She looked at David Hale, who was visibly shaking. Then she looked back at me. A very small, very thin smile touched her lips. It was the coldest expression I had ever seen. "Well," she said, her voice almost casual. "The boy thought he could defraud his wife and me in the same week." She picked up her teacup. "That's not just arrogant, Mr. Hale, it's greedy." She took a sip. "Julian Vance has made a severe miscalculation. He assumed I was just a checkbook. He seems to have missed Section 12B of our investment agreement. The morality and disclosure clause," I said. Marcus had briefed me. Eleanor's eyebrows shot up, a flicker of genuine surprise. "You've done your homework." "Good." She stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. "His lie to me, this material misrepresentation about who owns the core assets, gives me complete authority to terminate the deal. Right now, I can walk away, and my lawyers will countersue him into dust." My stomach dropped. This was the scenario Marcus had feared. "Ms. Vance," I started. "If you do that, the company implodes. The technology, my technology, becomes worthless, tied up in litigation for years." "I know," she said, still looking out the window, "and that would be a terrible waste." She turned around. Her pale blue eyes were locked on mine, not with sympathy, but with calculation. "Your technology, Mrs. Vance, is excellent. Your analysis this morning, and this presentation now, proves you are the asset. The management is the liability." She walked back to her chair. "I am not in the business of losing, Ilara. I am not investing $50 million to see it vanish. I am going to protect my investment." She sat down. "I am not pulling the deal. I am changing its terms." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" "I am still going to invest," she said, her voice flat. "But I am not investing in Julian Vance." The room snapped into a new focus. This was not an alliance of shared grief. This was an acquisition. "The board meeting is at 11, she said, looking at her watch. "Less than an hour. Julian is expecting to pop champagne. He is expecting his wife to arrive, flustered, and finally sign the document that gives him everything." "He is," I confirmed. "Excellent," Eleanor said. She pressed a button on an intercom on the side table. "Mr. Hale, get our general counsel on the line. Now, tell them we are restructuring the Aperture deal. Total removal of the CEO and COO for cause." She looked at me. "Mrs. Vance, sit down. You and I have less than an hour to design a new company, and you are going to be in charge of it." I arrived at the Aperture Dynamics building at 10:53 a.m. I didn't go to Julian's office. I went straight to the main boardroom on the 40th floor. The air was electric, thick with the smell of expensive coffee and the low hum of anticipation. I paused at the heavy glass door. Through it, I could see the scene: the long, polished mahogany table, the huge screens on the wall showing the faces of the seed investors, all dialed in via Zoom, all smiling, ready to be rich, and at the head of the table, Julian. He was radiant. He wore his best suit, a dark, intimidating charcoal, and a bright blue tie. He was energized, powerful, the king in his court. Beside him, Sabine. She was in a cream-colored power dress, her hair perfect, her makeup immaculate. She was positively glowing, the picture of a successful COO. They were laughing together at some shared joke, a perfect united front. I pushed the door open. The laughter stopped. Every head in the room turned. Julian's face broke into a wide, relieved smile. It was a smile of pure condescension, of a man placating a difficult child who had finally arrived. "Honey, You made it, he said, his voice booming with false warmth for the benefit of the investors. He gestured to an empty chair set slightly back from the main table. The spouse chair. Julian, I said, meeting his smile with one of my own. It felt brittle on my face. I told you I wouldn't miss it. He nodded, satisfied. Sabine shot me a look, a tiny, triumphant smirk. It was a look of pity. She thought I was the clueless wife, here to witness her man's greatest triumph before being discarded. She had no idea she was at her own execution. I walked to the chair but did not sit. I stood by the wall, near the door. Elara, sit, Julian commanded, his smile tightening. We're about to start. I'm fine here, I said. I'll just watch. Don't let me interrupt. He frowned, annoyed by my breaking of his script, but the wall clock showed 10:59. He didn't have time to argue. He turned back to the room, clapping his hands together. Well, everyone, let's get settled. We're just waiting on our lead investor to join the call, and then we can... The main boardroom door swung open. It was exactly 11 a.m. It wasn't a remote call. Eleanor Vance walked into the room. She was flanked by two men, both in dark, severe suits, both carrying thick leather briefcases. They were not colleagues, they were soldiers. Julian, who had been standing, froze. His face went a sickly, pale white. The smile vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed, processing dread. He had never met her in person. He had only ever dealt with David Hale, with her subordinates. He had been expecting a face on a screen, not the Queen herself. Eleanor Vance ignored him. She swept her cold blue eyes across the room, taking in the investors on the screens. Julian's panic, Sabine's sudden confusion, and finally, me. She gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was the signal, without a word. She walked to the head of the table, Julian's end, and took the seat opposite him, the one reserved for the guest of honor. Her two lawyers stood directly behind her. She placed her hands on the table. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. Shall we begin? Julian snapped his mouth shut. He scrambled, visibly trying to regain control. He was an actor who had just been thrown onto a new stage. Ms. Vance, what an honor. We weren't expecting you in person. I find it's better to assess a $50 million investment with my own eyes, she said flatly. Your presentation. Please. Julian swallowed. He fumbled with his laptop, his hands shaking slightly. He was off his game. He glanced at Sabine, who was no longer smirking. She was watching Eleanor with a new, dawning apprehension. He finally got the presentation on the main screen. He stood up, trying to recapture his earlier radiance. Thank you, Ms. Vance. Thank you. Everyone. What we are here to celebrate today is not just an investment. It is the future of fintech. He launched into his pitch. It was the same one I had heard in practice, the same lies. He spoke of exponential growth, unprecedented scalability, and paradigm-shifting technology. He was good. I had to give him that. He was a phenomenal salesman. As he warmed up, his confidence returned. He was starting to believe his own fiction again. He pointed to a graph showing a hockey stick projection of user acquisition. And this, he said, his voice brimming with passion, is all made possible by our proprietary core technology, Project Alpine. Beside him, Sabine leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. She couldn't help herself. She looked directly at me, a brief, sharp glance of utter disdain, as if to say, my project now. I remained perfectly still. I did not look at her. I did not look at Julian. I kept my eyes on Eleanor. Eleanor Vance watched the entire presentation, her face a mask of stone. She did not take notes. She did not check her phone. She just watched him, letting him spin his web, letting him build his own gallows, piece by piece. The silence from her end of the table was immense, a black hole of judgment, pulling all the air from the room. Julian was winding down, his voice reaching a crescendo. Aperture Dynamics is not just a company, it is a revolution. And with West Thorn Capital as our partner, that revolution begins today. He finished. He smiled, breathing a little heavily, waiting for the applause. There was none. The seed investors on Zoom were silent, waiting for Eleanor's reaction. Julian's smile faltered. He looked at Eleanor. Ms. Vance. Eleanor Vance let the silence hang for 3 more agonizing seconds. Then, she turned her head, just slightly. She looked at me. Mrs. Vance. It was the signal. The storm had arrived. Julian, visibly sweating now from the unexplained silence, tried to regain his footing. He cleared his throat and gave a small, strained laugh. Well, thank you, Ms. Vance, he said. Now, just to finalize the last bit of paperwork before we pop the champagne, my wife, Ilara, just needs to sign the updated spousal share agreement. A last-minute formality from legal. He looked at me, his eyes hard, a silent command. Ilara. He picked up a single, freshly printed document from the table, the same one I had destroyed last night, and slid it down the polished wood toward me. It stopped just at the edge, a final, arrogant summons. I didn't look at the paper. I didn't look at my husband. I looked directly at Eleanor Vance. She met my gaze, and she nodded. Once. Before anyone signs anything. Eleanor's voice sliced through the room. I have a question, Mr. Vance. Julian, who had been focused on me, snapped his head toward her. Of course, Ms. Vance. Anything. It's a simple question, she said. Please answer it clearly for my partners, who are listening. Who, exactly, owns the core intellectual property? Who owns the algorithm for Project Alpine? The question was a detonation. Julian froze. The color that had been returning to his face drained away completely. Sabine, beside him, went rigid. I'm not sure I understand, Julian stammered. The company, of course. Aperture Dynamics owns all its assets. It's the entire basis of our valuation. Is it? Eleanor asked, her voice dangerously quiet. She didn't raise it. She lowered it, forcing the entire room to lean in. Because that's not what my due diligence shows. My team has found some discrepancies. She gestured to one of her lawyers, who stepped forward and placed a file on the table. According to the Delaware Corporate Registry, Eleanor continued, the core IP appears to be held by a limited liability company called Alpine Exit Strategy, registered just 2 months ago, a company managed solely by... She paused, her eyes shifting to Sabine. A Ms. Sabine Parker. Sabine made a small, strangled sound. The investors on the Zoom screens, previously smiling, were now leaning forward, their expressions hardening. And, Eleanor continued, according to a power of attorney document filed 3 years ago and enacted 6 months ago, the rights to that same IP also appear to have been transferred from Mrs. Ilara Vance here. She looked at me, which is very confusing. Because according to our original assessment, Mrs. Vance is the architect who created the technology in the first place, on an unpaid contract, which would make her the legal owner. So, which is it? Mr. Vance. Does your company own it? Does Ms. Parker own it? Or does your wife, whom you're about to ask to sign away her rights, still own it? Julian was opening and closing his mouth. No sound came out. He looked from Eleanor to me, his eyes wild with a terrible, dawning comprehension. The trap was sprung. You, he whispered, pointing a shaking finger at me. You did this. He did this, Eleanor corrected him, her voice like ice. And in doing so, he has given me a gift. She picked up her own copy of the investment agreement. You see, Mr. Vance, I am a very careful woman. I include a clause in all my term sheets. Section 12B, the Morality and Material Disclosure Clause. It states that if any representative of the company is found to have willfully and materially misrepresented the company's assets, liabilities, or ownership structure, West Thorn Capital retains a unilateral option. She let the word hang in the air. An option, she said, to acquire the entire company, its assets, its debts, its name, for the total sum of $1. Sabine shot out of her chair, her face contorted with rage. That is insane. You can't do that. This is theft. We will sue you into the ground. Sit down, Ms. Parker, the lawyer beside Eleanor said, speaking for the first time. His voice was a calm, lethal monotone. You are not in a position to sue anyone. He opened his own briefcase. This is a copy of your complaint. We are filing it with the U.S. Attorney's Office this afternoon. While you were misrepresenting assets to Ms. Vance, you were also actively selling sublicenses for that same IP to foreign competitors, in direct violation of the preliminary investment agreement you signed with us. That constitutes wire fraud, and given the international nature of the transactions, well, RICO charges are also a distinct possibility. He placed a second file on the table, this one with Sabine's name on it. We have the bank transfers. Ms. Parker, we have the emails. We have everything. So, I would advise you to remain silent. Sabine collapsed back into her chair as if her legs had been cut out from under her. Her face was the color of ash. The room was absolutely silent. The faces on the Zoom screens were pale, horrified. They, too, were realizing they had been swindled. Eleanor Vance looked back at Julian. He was shaking, his whole body trembling with a mixture of terror and white-hot fury. He stared at me, his mask of the loving husband completely gone, revealing the monster I had been living with. So, Mr. Vance, Eleanor said, folding her hands, I am now exercising my option. This meeting is no longer about your funding. It is about the dissolution of your board. All the composure, all the arrogance, all the practiced charm evaporated from Julian's face. It was replaced by something primal, a raw, guttural fury. His eyes, fixed on me, were wide with the full, complete realization of my betrayal. He no longer saw a wife. He saw the architect of his ruin. You! He seethed, the word a ragged whisper. He took a step toward me, his hand still pointing, trembling. You did this. I had been standing still by the wall. Now, I walked forward. I moved past the chair he had assigned me and stepped toward the main table, toward the center of power. I looked at the man I had once loved, the man who had tried to erase me. No, Julian, I said, my voice clear and carrying in the dead silent room. You did this. I placed my phone on the polished mahogany surface, right next to the waiver he had wanted me to sign, and I pressed play. The speakers in the conference room were state-of-the-art. They were designed for clarity. My voice memo was crystal clear. First, the sound of the elevator door chiming in the P2 garage. Then, his voice, Julian's voice. Just need to get through Friday. After the Series B funding closes, she's out. Sabine's voice, anxious. And the contingency. Are you sure? And Julian's laugh, cold and cruel. Don't worry. The entire Project Alpine architecture is based on her design. She'll never realize she engineered her own prison. The faces of the investors on the Zoom screens were a gallery of horror. One man had his hand over his mouth. Another looked physically ill. They were not just witnessing a corporate takedown. They were listening to the unadulterated evidence of a conspiracy. They finally understood they had been minutes away from wiring $50 million to a pair of con artists. The recording finished with the sound of their kiss, a wet, intimate sound that echoed sickeningly, followed by Julian's final promise to her, waiting for us. I pressed stop. The silence that followed was heavier, more absolute than anything I had ever felt. Sabine was openly weeping, her head in her hands, her carefully constructed image shattered. Julian was just staring. He was a hollowed-out building, the facade blown clean off. Eleanor Vance stood up. Her movement was slow, deliberate. She commanded the room. "The board is present, either in person or by proxy," she announced, her voice resonating with finality. "The terms of Section 12B have been triggered by this gross and willful violation, but for the sake of our records, we will take a vote." She looked around the table and then at the screens. "All members of the board in favor of the immediate removal of Mr. Julian Vance and Ms. Sabine Parker from all executive duties, all board positions, and all signatory authority at Aperture Dynamics. For cause." Every single hand on the Zoom screens went up. The other seed investors in the room raised their hands. I raised my hand. Eleanor raised hers. The only two hands that remained on the table were Julian's and Sabine's. "The motion carries," Eleanor declared. "This meeting is adjourned." She looked at her lawyers. "Gentlemen," one of them spoke into his watch, "security is on its way." "No," Julian whispered. "No. This is my company. I built this." "You built nothing," I said, my voice quiet. "You stole what I built, and then you tried to set it on fire." The main doors opened. Two large men in professional black suits entered the room. They moved with a quiet efficiency, one heading for Sabine, the other for Julian. Sabine went limp, a sobbing, broken mess. The guard took her arm and pulled her to her feet. Julian, however, exploded. The terror was replaced by a final, desperate paroxysm of rage. "Get your hands off me," he screamed, swatting the guard away. "You can't do this." The guard did not flinch. He grabbed Julian's arm in a hold that made him wince and began to physically propel him toward the door. Julian was undone. He was pathetic. As the guard dragged him past me, he turned, his face purple with a fury that was all he had left. He was no longer a CEO, no longer a husband. He was just a cornered animal. "You'll get nothing," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Do you hear me, Alara Nothing? This company is finished. It is nothing without me. It will be bankrupt in a month. You will have nothing." He was still screaming as the guard forced him out of the room, his cries echoing down the hallway. The door clicked shut, sealing him out of his own life. Silence, once again, descended. I let out a breath I felt I had been holding for 3 days. I was shaking, the adrenaline finally draining, leaving me exhausted but upright. I did not look at the investors on the screen. I did not look at the lawyers. I turned my head and looked at the only other person in the room who mattered, Eleanor Vance. She was watching me, her expression unreadable. She held my gaze for a long, assessing moment. She was looking at the architect, at the woman who had both identified the flaw and surgically removed it. She gave a single, sharp nod. "Ms. Vance," she said, her voice crisp. "My apologies for the unpleasantness. You are now the interim chief executive officer of this company." She gestured to the empty, chaotic end of the table. "Our $50 million wire transfer will be initiated as soon as you have finished taking out the trash. I suggest you get your new general counsel on the line." "David Hale," she said to her technical lead, "will stay and assist you with the transition. My lawyers will handle the SEC." She looked at her watch. "It is 11:37 a.m. She looked back at me, at Julian's empty chair, still warm, at the head of the table. "Let's get to work." I walked to the end of the table, pulled out the chair that had been his, and for the first time in my life, I sat down. Thank you all for listening to my story. Please comment below and let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to connect and share our thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and show your support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.